this, and so I'll do the best I can. What I think we ought to do, my thought is that we'll start off with a Q&A. So, Barry's going to go first. Don't worry, don't worry. So we'll have a Q&A. Actually, let's make it a Q&A and C. So questions, answers, and comments. What I personally would like to see done here is something along the line that would point us towards what the community here thinks would be good things to do if we had the opportunity for a future testing of the Shroud. Of course, Bruno set us straight on that by saying he's not the Pope. So I don't know. So I'd like to do that. I'd also like to make one other comment here. Having been the leader of the team that studied the Shroud 70, president of Stirrup at the time of the expedition, we were successful in getting access to the Shroud. Maybe we could build on such an experience, but what we did, here's what we did. In 1977, we held a conference, and we was very much like this, not as big, but we held a conference in Albuquerque, and we talked about what do we know about the Shroud. Right? I think that's been done here. Okay, this is the status, the state, whether we agree, disagree, whatever. That's a sampling of the state of where those who are interested and work in the area of the Shroud are at this point in time. Then the next day, what we did, we held a workshop where we actually presented ideas for actual hands-on testing of the Shroud. And we all did it, and we recorded it. And everything was sort of pie-in-the-sky vision until one gentleman of financial means stood up and said, I think you ought to make a proposal to Turin, and I think you ought to go as a delegation, he said. And so there was, I think you had 12 of you ought to go, and I'm going to pay for it. Now, you could push me over with a feather at that point. But that's how it got started. And then things just kept on rolling, and pretty soon, Stirrup happened. So this conference has done the first part, but I guess if we want to do this, my thought is maybe that second part isn't a bad idea. So anyway, Barry, please, your comment.
Oh, the only comment I wanted to make, John, is was relevant to the comment you made about the transmitted light images and the potential for ambient light to have created a problem for us as far as lighting from the front. Not possible, and here's the reason why. The exposure threshold of the film we were using was such that I had to make an exposure for the brightest part of the backlit image. The walls were quite far away from the Shroud, and they were deep red velveteen. There was no reflected light coming back that would have had any influence, and the best example I can give you of that, you know, there's been this whole thing about moon photos being faked, because when you see a photograph that they took of the moon with their big Hasselblad cameras that we use on the Shroud, there are no stars in the sky, and people say, oh, it's a fake. But when you expose for the very bright reflectivity of the surface of the moon, it causes the camera to clamp down so far that the stars are not bright enough to be exposed, and that's why the reflectivity of those deep red walls would not have affected the frontal photographs I made from the front. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Can I make a quick comment to your comment?
You're the man.
I'm not sure I totally like that from the standpoint of yeah, that hurt.
I'm
No,
sorry.
no.
It's just that.
No, when I look at those photographs, we can see structures lit up, and it's done so by reflected light, so that reflected light has to be there. I have wanted to make actual quantitative measurements of the throughputs to try to, and I had the idea one time maybe to measure the thickness of the image on the shroud, and I saw that, and it just would contaminate our theoretical work.
Yeah, but if you look at the transmitted light overall images, you'll see that virtually almost nothing around surroundings is even visible, because the exposure for the brightness of the backlit image was enough to, yeah, go ahead and look, was enough to keep any reflectivity from, look at the red walls, by the way, if you stop on one of those, all the walls were red velveteen, which absorbed light dramatically. So I don't think there was a significant, there you go. There's not really a significant amount.
Well, this has been, I've cropped this so you can't see the outside.
Yeah, I see.
But you know, the pictures you took, they were, you could see the surrounding structure here, which means that there's reflected light.
A little bit, but not from those red
But
walls.
I don't like reflected light. Let's just do it.
God invented it.
Okay. Yeah, but thank you, Barry. See, we don't always agree. Did you see that?
No, but it's
Ray?
Hi, John. I'd like to make two comments, because I think if there is an opportunity to do further science, it's extraordinarily important. And I think each scientific dimension needs to be framed in the context of an objective. When SERP went to Turin, the objective appeared to be to examine the imaging mechanism. Was it a painting? At least I've heard Barry make that statement many a time. And they came up with a huge spectrum of really interesting ways to examine the shroud that would remove any, identify any painting. There's a couple of things I think as objectives I'd like to propose. One objective is, who is the man of the shroud? We heard mitochondrial DNA identified, and it strikes me that there are a number of artifacts that are supposed to be relics of Jesus Christ. There is the Sudarium of Oviedo, there is the Shroud of Turin, there is the Cap of Coheres, there is, in fact, a couple of tunics that have, each of these things typically have a little bit of blood on them. It would be very exciting to, if the mitochondrial DNA worked out, if that could be compared. Okay, so that's one. The second thing, it seems to me, is we know the shroud may, however hard we work at preserving it, nevertheless, the background of the shroud may be darkening, and slowly the contrast between the image and the backing cloth will go away. So one of the things we desperately need, I think, is the absolutely best possible multi-spectrum, highly detailed imagery of the shroud to make sure that the shroud is archivally available to people throughout not only the next 100 years, but the next 1,000 years if we are lucky enough to be around. Because let's face it, it's a linen cloth. It would be wonderful to have that amount of data. So those are two things that I think are really important.
Bruno, I think you talked about that, about multispectral imaging. Do you have anything further you would like to say?
For the first question, I am not an expert in genetics, but I heard some expert who say to me that for the knowledge of this moment, it's not easy to make a comparison with really significant result. And so I cannot have nothing because I'm not expert in this field. For the second question, which is a very important, because I think our duty is to make people generation which follow us to be almost in our situation, to see not worse than we see. And this was the aim of the work made at the beginning of this millennium, when a commission, international commission, decided the new way of conservation of the shroud. The shroud, as you know, is no more rolled nor folded, but is preserved on a completely flat, on a flat plane. But and more in the case there is no more the normal atmosphere, but there is argon with 0.5% of oxygen. And the commission, there was also Alan Adler in this commission, decided that this was, for what we know today, now, is the best way in order to evitate what you said. So the diminishing of the contrast between the cloth and the image, which is normal if the oxidation of the cellulose due to the presence of oxygen can cause a increasing of this problem. But the actual way of conservation, we think, is the best way in order to stop this diminishing visibility of the image, which could cause in I don't know how many years the risk of no more visibility, no more possibility to see really the image. And the humidity is of 50%, the fixed interior temperature is 20 degrees Celsius degree, and the pressure inside the case is controlled in order to evitate a gradient with the exterior and atmosphere pressure. I think that in this moment, obviously, is in completely dark, obviously with the exception of the period of exposition, but during which we will study to use light should cause the minimum problems to the shroud. I think that in this moment is the best that we can do.
Probably the best that's ever been in its full history. Okay, sure.
I'd like to just say one thing, Ray.
Just a second, just a comment from the scribe. The recommendation was there's natural aging taking place. We need an absolutely broad and deep scale of multidisciplinary photography for posterity. You endorse that before the other comments. That's all.
But by the way, Bob is going as a speaker tomorrow, and he'll be the last, but definitely not the least, speaker, giving a critical summary of various hypotheses. It's really a very good paper that he'll be presenting, but I asked Bob to be up here to take, as a recorder, to make sure we capture what we're talking about. I just like to say one thing really quick. I don't think it's clear that the background is catching up to the shroud image. It could be the other way around, that the image is getting even more contrasty with time. We just don't know. I mean, this idea floats around, and I hear it said all the time, but no one has really measured that. And but I think what I would get from your comment is that that's something we ought to design an experiment to help us decide that.
Very difficult to tell because the technology used to photograph the shroud in the past is varied enough from image to image that you can't really tell, I don't think. What really can quantify? Yeah, it hasn't been quantified.
So we don't know.
So I totally agree.
Yeah.
But it should be an assumption, John. You don't know, but you should assume that, because that's what normally happens. And if you assume that, then his recommendation is a very good one.
It depends what, yeah.
Complete archive as much as possible in the case that this happens, which does normally happen.
Well, another dimension here, I think it's important to note, that if you don't have a masterful database that can be replicated, you suffer the possibility that the Shroud will be lost to something like terrorist action. For example, it certainly appears to many people that the attempt on Shroud was made, that it only marginally escaped. And there's no reason to believe that that's the last attempt that might be made on the Shroud. There's enough people that are nuts in the world. So part of the motivation for getting a totally comprehensive database, front, back, multispectral, high resolution, is that in the event that some of these lunatics were ever successful, we would not lose access, in essence, to the most comprehensive data available for the Shroud. I think that's just a prophylactic measure that's fundamentally important.
Here.
The new case is fireproof, by the way.
That's excellent.
Another question, comment, question?
Yeah, I just want to know what's wrong on the same page about multispectral digital imaging, which is a very relatively new concept, certainly since about the year 2000, I think. And there's a story that took Providence last year, 2 years ago, where they were able to prove that a drawing was an original Da Vinci that had been credited to a German school called the Principessa, and they were able to not only, but the company that did that study also had done the Mona Lisa, and they were given the right to do multispectral digital imaging of the Mona Lisa, and what they were able to do is back up all of the years of accretion, all of the years of the Mona Lisa being damaged, and they actually discovered things in the Mona Lisa, like a river in the background, that no one had seen for centuries. So then that multispectral digital imaging is really, I think, got to be one of the prime things we want to do, because we can create a database that would probably run less than a terabit and would give you the ability of science to do tests on the Shroud to infinity.
Well, when you talk about the size of this, it depends on the spatial resolution and the spectral resolution to do that.
Clarification from the scribe.
And
2 points you made. One is the need for this broad spectrum, but also to employ in testing not just a self-assembled team, but maybe commercial sources that have very specific expertise.
Well, I think we're going to have to find someone with expertise in this area. It's not going to be something that somebody from Oxford or University of Colorado or somebody can run out and do. It's a commercial point, and there are companies that do it. I think there was one company, Barry, that was interested some time ago in doing it. But this thing would create a permanent database that could be experimented on, that could be examined into the future. And that's why I think it's really important.
I'm just going to say, in terms of things future testing, how about repeating the carbon dating using the original protocols that were supposed to have been done in 1988? Wouldn't that be worth it if we could?
Some of these questions might be broadcast better.
The question of Dr. Silverman is that why don't we just repeat the radiocarbon date again? I would like to answer that. I have not been a big fan of redoing the radiocarbon date because we have a date that was done. I personally think that unless we can have
serious reasons that why we think the radiocarbon gate failed, we should, it may not be the wisest thing to do. Personally, I think there's a good chance that if we did the radiocarbon gate, we'd be able to get the same data. And if we do that, the perception on the shroud is going to be it's all over. Now, there's going to be a risk in that if we did it. But the question is, what's the reason for redoing the carbon date?
It's the protocol to follow.
Can I answer that? Just
Yes.
comment on your comment. It's a simple matter of collecting more data. And I've never understood now for 26 years why the church, some scientists don't want to collect more data. If we had 3 days from 3 different samples, from 3 different places on the clock, a lot of these questions would go away. Reweave, contamination, those could be eliminated. Even neutron activation or isotope enrichment couldn't possibly be equal all over the clock. If all those dates agreed, if we had then 4 dates that all agreed, a lot of people would say, well, that's it. But people have already said that. But maybe they don't agree. It's a simple matter of collecting more data and then one can move on. But to Bruno's point, I think that is the primary question. And to turn around what Bishop Sheridan said, what if it's not? If it's not, then all the questions of image formation kind of recede, don't they, into how was it done in the Middle Ages? Was it a block print or a dry rubbing?
Scribe,
I
John?
would actually disagree with that last point, because if you buy off on the radiocarbon date, then you've got to implicitly buy into the idea that there's a hypothetical someone that's going to make something like this, with all the characteristics that we now know about the shroud. So there are possibilities from a physics standpoint that there could be a global change in the radiocarbon date. And I could give one right now if you want to hear it, but I don't think we want to necessarily spend the time for that. And the point is, what I'm trying to make is that what if it's that's causing the shroud to have that date, and then you come up with the same date, you would lose any interest in the shroud to even continue further, when in fact you shouldn't be losing interest. You should be trying to solve the problem and ask why did it fail in the first place. I think we ought to go, look, when the radiocarbon date was taken, let me just give you a little history here. It was proposed originally by Stirrup to do the radiocarbon date. And we made a proposal in 1984. And we had radiocarbon as one of 26 look factors. That was extracted from the Stirrup proposal. And then Stirrup, by a process that wasn't very pleasant, was removed from that whole thing. And so it was just doing radiocarbon. What we would have done, what we were planning on doing, Stirrup, was before we were going to give it to radiocarbon users, we were going to do non-destructive analyses, so we have a database on the samples that are going to be radiocarbon used. And so at least we would have had something that we could have been able to address the issue that if the shroud came out to be 14th century, which it did. So now, what are we in? We're in a big mess, really, because we don't have the data to be able to challenge from a physics point of view why that radiocarbon error, it would think it erred.
But then if you did it using the original protocols that you had suggested, using 7 samples rather than 1 small one and so on, and I mean, people might say, what if it turns out to be 14th century again? What if it turns out to be 2,000 years old?
Sure, I mean, that's always a possibility, you know, from the standpoint, you don't know what you don't know. But the way it seems to me to resolve a problem like this, we have data
If you take the carbon-14 out of it, it looks like the shroud could really be genuine. So I think that the best strategy is to try to find out why, then if carbon-14 is aired, why don't we try to find out why it aired? And that requires going in and looking at these samples, not just retesting something that's already given us a date that.
But that's
That
one data point. You don't do one experiment and say that's it. Everybody takes more than one sample. And we have one, and that's one.
But we did have a date that's been set, that, as far as the radiocarbon labs are concerned, they think they've done it.
I thought they have.
For 25 years, well, that's an opinion that we have now.
Yes, but
But
it's
at
an
least on,
opinion, and it can be proven false or true. No, there's no proof now.
Can I say one
Scott,
thing? Has anyone else in this room done carbon dating? I have. I've done 150 samples submitted to the lab.
Dating methods. And the problem with carbon-14 dating is it has an unreasonable cachet in the popular mind. We do carbon-14 again and get another bad result, we're going to write the shroud off forever until people get over it. But don't you want the truth? What we could do that would be very interesting would be to validate things like the vanillin test with better samples. And by the way, that's much less invasive than carbon-14. We could look into the validity of the work that Giulio Ponte is doing on mechanical characteristics and see if that can be put on a more solid footing. And then you have a situation where there's a vote. And the vote is there's 5 or whatever the number is, different methods of dating, and they all either, you're taking a vote, they all either agree or they don't. And that means the more data, better than just repeating a test that failed, that we don't understand why it failed.
Comment, just a comment from maybe some of the folks here missed a presentation today, because we did have people that missed a couple presentations today. There was an excellent presentation today. It was speculative, but it basically concluded if you test the shroud again, you'll get the same date. Think of the implications. Give us time, be patient, look for other alternatives. We've got everybody in this room, not everybody, but a majority of people in this room would say, I have a judgment of authenticity without carbon dating. We don't need it for that judgment. Truth will be found, be patient with it, let some other theories develop, but follow this recommendation, which I've said, vanillin, broaden the spectrum of dating methods. But additional carbon dating at this time is nothing but dangerous and probably irresponsible.
What about the thymol issue, John?
thymol issue.
I mean, that's,
Well,
it has to be dealt with.
Well, it was done.
There's
It
material.
was done last days. I hardly think it's going to be done again. I'm looking.
No, I mean, what impact might the thymol treatment, remember the clock, the shroud was in the reliquary for about 12 years after it was treated with thymol. Did that thymol add any new carbon to the
Well,
shroud?
okay, I'm not going to answer that. I can't answer that.
No, I neither can I. I'm asking you.
But there's thymol-free material. It's the char that was removed during 2002.
That's true. Yeah, and that was,
Oh, in 2002?
that was already after the.
I do not think you want to radiocarbon date and test that.
That was after the thymol was in 88. They treated the reliquary.
Thymol is not of 2002.
I don't think you want to.
Is 88.
The charred material for radiocarbon dating.
Why?
Because that's material from the shroud, all right, but it's material that has undergone a radical thermal event. It's called burning.
Do you realize that they burn the sample in order to do
Yes, but they do
carbon-14?
that, there's a difference. They do that in an internal, closed environment. this stuff was burned in an open environment. Carbon atoms, which were involved in carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, have left the environment, and they
But that
probably
carbon,
have isotopic.
if that's carbon 12 or carbon 14, when it burns, it stays carbon 12
I know,
or carbon
that's too
14.
simplistic. If something is going to burn chemically, there's going to be an isotopic fractionation that's going to happen when the gases are released. The carbon-containing gases go off into the atmosphere, never more return to you. And so you have the probability that you're going to get the wrong thing by using that stuff. So I don't think we should.
Take radiocarbon dated fires, HR fires.
Yeah, but those are really generally way older than what we're talking about here.
Well, it's,
You know, I don't really think that's something we ought to touch. Well, why do we want to touch that? If we can,
It's
if we want to
data.
do a radiocarbon, we should take a good sample that has not undergone this radical thermalization and loss of carbon.
aren't you curious as to what that would give?
No, I'm not curious at all, because I think we have to be responsible with the shroud.
Dr. Jackson, second question.
Please.
Again, my original research, I got involved in the Shroud buses and NASCAR 14 variant throughout the Shroud. Robert already showed us that there's a model that basically is demonstrating this. The letter that I wrote to you and that I've been writing to everybody for the past 20 years is I have an experiment using X-ray films. And, you know, the thing that I'm doing without any kind of radiation, without any kind of light, by the only variable that I can easily change is time. And here's the X-ray slides that we tried in Ohio with Sue Benford. With we first suspected that the carbon-14 was increased in the body of this person that burnt up. But then when she took it to the professor of radiology at the Ohio State Medical School, what he said is, it's not an emission reaction, it looks like an absorption reaction. This is what's giving me my hypothesis that the electron spin in there, in the molecules themselves, is actually kind of pulling the free neutrons to it, and when that free neutron goes through its decay, that's when it's exposing that film. So this is one way that we can do experiment, not only on one little small part of the shroud ring, but we can do the whole shroud ring without any destruction or anything else to the cloth itself. And you would get a high resolution image probably from each of the different areas of variant carbon-14.
If I may, as a total non-scientist, I think we're missing a vitally important point. And there is no clear path for submitting testing protocols, destructive or non-destructive. Where do they go? People in this room have submitted testing protocols to the Pope, to the Bishop of Turin, to the Centro, to the Nuncio, and they don't even get a response that the protocol has been received, let alone responded to. And I think that's the first step. Bruno, how do you get a protocol from a scientist to the deciding factor that doesn't get lost in the abyss of the Vatican bureaucracy?
A proposal for a new collection of data, as I explained today, has been sent to the Holy See 10 years ago.
Well,
The whole
Takes time.
sea is as deep as the deepest ocean.
The Holy See is the owner of the shroud. This is the...
Bruno, that is another vitally important issue, is that in 1978, there was a different owner of the shroud. The House of Savoy owned it with a very forward-thinking, scientifically oriented former king of
it was easier in that situation.
It's a religious
And it worked.
right?
Don't forget
Is
about
it a
the
religious
relative.
life first, or is it a data for science to get its hypothesis tested? So the church has to be very careful about it. This is a religious relic. It's not for scientists to, like, give them the chance. Here's your chance, guys. Come on, do your stuff. If you blew it with radiocarbon test or not, we don't know. So there's part of that, which I like to mark test myself. It's a religious relic. How's it going to change the world? How's it going to change perception? The church also has a very long view. So from the church's point of view, 100 years, couple hundred years, come back in half a millennium.
But you do make a good point, though. Suppose we were to come up with a series of proposals for testing. Who would we give it to, and how would it be processed? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that the only clever thing to do is to organize an international commission which has the aim to take in examination all the proposal there are, because if you remember when in 2000 there was in Turin this important congress, at the end the Archbishop of Turin asked for a collection, to collect a proposal coming from all the scientists who would like to propose some new test to realize. This proposal arrived, they were collected, they were submitted to the revision of a group of peer referee, and the result, the final result, was sent to the Holy See, because the Holy See is the owner of the Shroud. And in this proposal I wrote that it was necessary to have an international commission with experts in every field that we retain fundamental for the research on the Shroud, and this was the starting point. And I think that is the best thing to do. But in order to organize and to call an international commission, is necessary to have the start from the owner. It is not yet arrived.
Bruno, it's been 14 years since we submitted that material.
Yes.
14 years?
Yes, 2000 and
From 2000?
and yes, I see. Yes, but in any case, the relation to the Holy See arrived. I don't remember exactly, but more or less 1 hour before the death of John Paul II, 204. 10 years, but 10 years in any case is not a little amount of time.
Well, I think it's obvious that since a number of the principal investigators of those proposals have that we would have, this would have to be reaccomplished. We want it to be reaccomplished in a way that would be productive.
Michael. The battery.
All right. But I'll try to say it again. I think that we would have to reaccomplish this in a way that will have the attention that would happen in
shroud might be saleable? Could somebody, could you have a shroud science organization that is sort of semi-permanent so that a sequence of tests over time could be performed, and the church would see this as a group that's actually trying to unite science and faith in a meaningful way. Because right now, scientists seem to be treated as dangerous people, and the church doesn't seem to want to let them anywhere near anything that they value. I mean, I may be wrong in that, I may be exaggerating, but certainly there was a sense of that, I think, in Corinth, and it has persisted. Otherwise, why ignore for 20 years proposals that were, a lot of effort was put into, and they're put forward, and what does the church do? Dead, stilly silence. And so we need to open up the communications to the church and make it clear that the scientists are interested only in the truth.
I think that's a good point. Opening up communications certainly has to be a good thing.
So, I was going to say, something happened last spring, which was really, that was for a very important issue for me. But the Pontifical Academy and also the Academy for Social Sciences jointly sponsored an international commission. And that international, to go to a conference, to go to Rome, and at a conference, it included Nobel Prize winners, including Preston, who's the person who invented the name for change for our age. I think, first of all, it's got to be truly international. And given everything going on, I'm not so sure the emphasis should necessarily come from the United States. I really mean that. Because that's a political point. But I think we also have a new owner. Okay? I think this new owner is a very interesting person, and the things he said and the things he's done so far. And also, there's a little incident that happened when he was Archbishop of Argentina, or Archbishop of Argentina in Buenos Aires, where he actually apparently encouraged a scientific investigation of one of the miraculous hosts.
Eucharistic miracle.
Yeah, and he actually sent out a host of the story I told to Fred Zubby.
That's true. Here's a book right here about that.
Okay, but the whole point is, we have a different code. Some of us think that's really great. So, but I do think that the impetus is probably, especially Fergaris, you're the guy, because you are the one who has a responsibility, and you're going to be our father in all of this, okay? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And was part of all these connections to the Turin scene. His uncle was a blessed, and the person who was in charge of the museum and everything, she had a prayer card for Rinaldi's uncle. And that played a big role in David Rolfe and Rinaldi getting their foot in the door for that film. But without trying to puff you up, I wouldn't do anything like that. But you're the guy that's in the position as being from Centro, 500 years of experience in this. You've got to give us a reason.
Yes, I wanted to say that we have to understand what were the weaknesses with the 1978 team. When they got there, they didn't have the right power. They were short on power, but it wasn't their fault. There's certainly new people that are involved. At that time, you had many national laboratories with a lot of scientists. That's all gone. You have national laboratories, but they're operated by for-profit organizations. And that makes a big difference. So you're gonna have to get expertise some way, and the only way you're gonna get that is, you have to have more than a year to prepare. And you have to know that once you're prepared, you can go.
Yes, we would sort of like to have enough time to prepare. But in 1978, when we were given permission April 26, 1978, we had to be ready with a whole team on October 8th through 13th at the end of that exposition. So take it from April to October, and we at that time didn't have our team was not assembled. We didn't have any money to do this, and we all had to do this on our own time. But we were all doing it because we were motivated and we were interested in wanting to get this done. And we believed that we had permission given to us, and that motivated us. That, if we didn't have that permission, we would have just sat there. It was that permission that just energized the whole thing. And so really, that permission is very important to receive from the authorities regarding the Shroud. So you really have a number of things that you have to overcome. Then there are the things that are unforeseen. I'll tell you a little quick story. When we launched our expedition, on the morning when we were launching it from these various points in the United States to go over to Turin to do the testing, I got a telephone call from Tom DiMahalla, who was the logistics person on our team. And he says, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "What news?" And he says that Pope John Paul I had just died. Yeah, well, that's what I heard in the morning. And we thought, oh my gosh. Now here's the pressure we had at that time. We had enough money to take everybody over there and back, but we only had enough money to take our equipment, which was borrowed and acquired by all the principal investigators, but we didn't have enough. We didn't have the money to bring it back. And at that point, we were working on it, you know. But Tom said, "Should we really go under those circumstances?" And it's one of those times that you just have to think for about, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those times you just have to, you know, do it, you know. And blow those guys into orbit, you know. That's about the way it was. And so I just told Tom, I said, you know, thought about 15 seconds, and I said, "Tom, if we don't go, then we'll never see the Shroud." And so I said, "We're going." And we really had the pressure not to go. So I guess what I'm saying is that if a future examination is anything like this one, that one, it might take a little bit of guts, you know, to make it happen. And when we got there, the equipment couldn't even be brought into Italy because of an administrative problem. So we spent a whole week just waiting for our equipment to come. And we didn't. Father Rinaldi was working the problem as best he could. He eventually got it, and well, no, it really wasn't a bribe as much as it was. Father Rinaldi came. If you want to hear the story, Father Rinaldi came to me, and he says, in his shaky voice, he says, "I hope I never have to do that again." I said, "What are you talking about, Father?" And he says, well, he went to the customs guy, and he basically sat on his desk and looked him straight in the eyes, and he says, "How would you like to go down in history as being the man who stops the scientific studies of the Shroud for the world? You." That's all this fellow had to hear, but he still was bound, and he says, okay, I will release it if you can post a bond equal to the value of the equipment. Well, we didn't even have the money to bring the equipment back to the United States, much less post some bond. So then what Father Rinaldi did is he went to the Cardinal of Turin, explained the problem, and the Cardinal, Balestrero, said, I will post that bond with the resources of the church. That's what happened. And as soon as that occurred, the equipment was brought to us, and we went to town, and
We had Dan help us to get it all set up.
yes, I mean, you remember that just, but that's what happened. I mean, and then when we're there, we had problems that experiments would fail. And this wasn't just a cakewalk. It may look like a cakewalk, but it wasn't. We had experiments failing. We had to put new experiments in place. We didn't want to lose our time slots, and we were rolling through. But I think it was the grace of God that was with us, and we got the data such as what we got.
Robert Rutgers has his hand up all the time, and I don't think he looked at it.
Oh, please, yes. Sorry.
Take the microphone.
Several issues. I'm still going on the results of my paper with the neutron absorption being the actual cause of the discrepancy here. I think we should have a multi-pronged approach because of the difficulty with dealing with the bureaucracy of the ownership of the Shroud. There are other people, as I understand it, there's other pieces that are not under that bureaucracy. They're located elsewhere.
But they're located from that same corner.
But they're located from that same corner. So what I recommend that I do is that I apply my computer code to calculate other isotopes and what neutrons would be absorbed and what isotopes would change, so that we could measure other isotopes in carbon-14. Carbon-14 is just one. There's a whole host of isotopes, perhaps, that could be measured. Let's measure them from the same location in order to prove that that location has absorbed neutrons. And once you do that, you eliminate the problem with carbon-14, and the church loves you.
You're not going to get your hands on it.
We actually have two little threads from Julio. We're looking at chlorine 36. And it's so doggone hard, but we'll get to it.
Look, Pam Moon had to go to the Freedom of Information Act to get Oxford just to release the photographs.
Here, try.
There is same aerosol.
So I had access to one of the
If it's properly protocol. Speak up.
I'm gonna fire him.
They would welcome that. I can't imagine that. It's not the church, it's the university
Have you
aerosol.
talked to Jim Delvin? He runs the lab. They wouldn't even let me photograph the second.
I'd like you to say something about what you just said. Did you know
Pass that microphone again.
Did you?
There you go.
I don't know what it is that people.
I want you to, this is important. I think this is important. Do you hear what he just said? He says that he's got a hypothesis for the radiocarbon date. He's worked on it 6 months. And this hypothesis makes predictions. So this is what I was trying to get at, that if we could request permissions to test this hypothesis. Not that we should put our eggs in one hypothesis basket, but there are others that also, I've got a hypothesis for radiocarbon dating too, which I would like to see. And probably there are others, I'm sure. And so if we were to formulate hypotheses that make testable observations, then what we could do is to request access to the Shroud to test those. In other words, when Stirrup did its testing, it was a shotgun approach. We didn't know exactly what we're looking for, so we tried to get data in a lot of different categories. Well, now we're, 36 years later, and we've got hypotheses now. So I think we should be attentive to those, and those those are bases for making reasoned, requests for access to the shroud. So I think that's a good way to go.
Can I just make another comment with respect to the neutron activation?
He's got the microphone.
Oh, go ahead.
Another thing that I could do, for example, once I finish my calculation, I'm not done yet, but I take those results into the dating laboratories and offer to lecture to them from this perspective and try and get some interest. Yes, and try and get some interest from their perspective to free up the samples for additional testing with my prediction. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a reasonable idea.
Yeah, but also, but see, here's another thing we have to be concerned about, is that the samples aren't infinite. We have to make sure, or somebody has to make sure, that we don't exhaust the sample by doing a test that would sort of save the city, or destroy the city to save it, type of thing. I think we have to make these requests for various hypotheses that you want to test that require the use of that sample. So there's going to be maybe a priority, maybe a sharing of